What is going on, everybody, and welcome. In this week's video, I'm talking about exactly how I go about editing one of my images in Photoshop. So in this video, I don't exactly have any really basic tutorial on how to do anything in particular, but this is a great image for you to just follow along, apply some of these same effects to your own image as I'm editing mine, and just simply keep pausing and playing the video and keep up with me on a photo of your own. This will allow you to kind of check out my workflow, see how you like it, take some things from it, and apply it to your own workflows. So that covers exactly what we're going to be talking about in today's video. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, I've got my image open in Photoshop here. Now, the first thing that I want to do is duplicate this background layer just by simply clicking and dragging down here. That way we have a copy of the original layer at the very end, so we can kind of do a little before and after. I'm going to call this one on-one filters, and I'm going to use the on-one effects for this layer. So I'm going to go up to filter, down to on-one effects. Now, on-one is very similar to the Knit collection. It is something you have to purchase aftermarket. If you do not have the on-one or the Knit collection, no worries. I'm just going to apply two really quick filters and then move on from there. However, if you do have the on-one filters or the Knit collection, I highly recommend using these two filters. They're two of my favorites, and I just love the way that it makes my images look. It really helps me prime the images to further edit them later. So I'm on effects now. I can go ahead and click add filter. The first one that I like to do is sunshine. So I'm going to click on sunshine here. And you can see how this really just kind of softens out the image, gives it a little bit more glow. And I can adjust the sliders here if need be. I might increase the warmth just a touch and give it a little more glow. And that's looking good to me. Now, the other filter I like to use is the dynamic contrast. In the Knit collection, this is called tonal contrast. It does the same thing. It's just a way of kind of fine-tuning your the micro contrasts in the scene, so the fine contrasts. So I like to zero out all the sliders and then just slide the bar a little too far and then bring it back to figure out exactly where I want to be applied. That's looking pretty good to me. So I've just added a little bit of micro contrast back into the scene, especially to the foreground here, which helps kind of make the image pop a little bit more. Once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and click done in the bottom right corner. And the cool thing is that that is going to load right back into Photoshop for me and apply that as its own separate layer. Okay, so now that this is loaded back into Photoshop, I'm just going to go through and kind of show you my whole workflow in Photoshop. And the first thing that I usually like to do is just add a little bit of contrast. So I'm going to go down to my adjustment layers here, and I'm going to add a curves layer. Now I'm going to make a little S-curve here. I'm not really going to talk too much about exactly how the S-curve works, but by doing an S-curve, that is going to add a lot of contrast to my scene. And you can see I just barely dragged that, and I've already added a fair amount of contrast here. Somewhere right in there is looking good. So S-curves are great for adding contrast, and I use them all the time, especially at the start of my image editing process. Now, the next thing that I want to do is use a little luminosity mask to bring the highlights down. You can see right here my clouds are getting a little bit overexposed. So I can use a luminosity mask and bring the brightness of those clouds down. I'm using the TK basic panel. It's free if you give him your email at the time of making this video at goodlight.us. Highly recommend getting the free version. It's a great way to make luminosity masks. That's super simple. Basically, the way it works is I'll click composite here. And then this is going to load a selection of my image. So I want to get a good selection of the clouds there. And probably a lights 3 is going to be my best bet. I can click layer and curves, and then it will apply that selection as a layer mask on this curves layer. So now when I adjust this, it will drop the brights in the scene, which is good because I don't want these clouds to get too blown out. I want to retain a little bit of color in them. So I'm going to go somewhere around there probably. Looks pretty good to me. Now, the next thing that I want to do is probably bring up the oranges in the sky. And I can do that by going over here to my adjustment layers and creating a hue saturation layer. This is going to be kind of your go-to for all things color. Now, if I increase the master, it's going to increase the saturation of everything in the scene. So I want to go down to yellows so that it will target the yellow oranges of the sky and not increase the blues and everything else. So that right there looks pretty good to me. I want to be sure not to overdo it. but I think that's looking pretty good. Now, one other thing that I want to do here to kind of create a little bit of depth is to paint a little bit of light coming in behind the mountain range here. So I'm going to do that by dodging and burning. Now, if I create a new layer to dodge and burn, I'm going to go to soft light. But the problem is if I was to paint with a yellowish color, that my painting job is going to be very sloppy here. You can see I'm going over the edge, which is not good. I just want to paint behind the mountains. So I'm going to make a selection of the sky very quickly and easily using a tool called the quick selection tool. So I'm just going to select the quick selection tool. I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to make sure that I am selected on a layer with pixels, because if I'm selected on the blank layer, this tool is not going to work. And now you can see that it's doing a pretty good job, or it was doing a pretty good job of snapping to the edges. And I can go back. There we go. Sometimes you just have to try it a few times. Now you can see it's working a lot better. There we go. So now you can see that the marching ants are showing me my selection. Basically, I'm selecting everything in the sky and nothing in the foreground. So I can go ahead and click on this layer and click the layer mask button. It will automatically apply this as our layer mask, which is perfect. Now I can go back in with my brush tool by hitting B. I'm going to lower the opacity of the brush tool to probably about 10%. And I'm going to sample a color from the sky so that the color I'm painting is an accurate representation of what color is actually in the sky. Go ahead and hit I to get the eyedropper tool or find it in my toolbar. I'm going to go ahead and sample a color over here. Then I'm going to go to that color and I'm going to make it a little less saturated and a little bit brighter. Somewhere about in here is probably good. I can hit B again to get my brush tool. And now I can just simply paint in here. So I want to paint quite a few strokes. Like I said, I'm at 10% here, so the effect is being applied pretty slowly. So a lot of clicks are going to be necessary, but that's good because I want my effect to be very soft and subtle. I don't want it to be obvious that I've done this. And you can go in here and accent some of the clouds as well if you like. So there's really about unlimited possibilities that you can do here. I'm just showing you a really basic thing to do to kind of add a little dimensionality to your scene, but you definitely can do more or less. A lot of times I'll spend more time dodging and burning. A lot of times I'll spend less. So I'm just going to do this simple dodge and burn here. I've added a little bit of light on the horizon there, and I think that is looking pretty good. Let's add a little more light over here. Perfect. That is looking good. So the next thing that we are going to do is I'm going to reduce the blues. I don't really like how blue these mountains are getting over here. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Hue Saturation. This time we're going to select blues, and we are just going to bring the saturation of blues down. And that is looking a lot better. I don't really like what it's doing to the sky up here, so I'm just going to use a layer mask, and I'm going to paint the effect out a little bit up here. Perfect. And now you can see I'm just affecting these mountains here. So that looks great. Now the next thing that I want to show you guys how to do is a little bit of spot healing. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call this spot heal just so I remember. I'm not always the best at naming my layers, so pardon me when I forget here. But I'm going to zoom in on my image. You can use Command plus to zoom in, or what I did there is held the spacebar, clicked Command, and then clicked and dragged, and it brought me in. So I like using this spot healing brush because it does quite a good job of removing the spots. If I just click here, you can see that that spot is now gone. I can just click here, and that spot is now gone. I might try this right here as well, and maybe right there. And I think that's looking pretty good. If there were any foreground elements you wanted to remove, you could, but I kind of like the look that these like bare sticks are giving me, so I am going to leave it just like that. That is looking pretty good to me. Okay, so I'm kind of wrapping up this image here, and what I really think would help the image is a really strong vignette around the edges. That'll kind of give my viewers a way to kind of focus in on the center of the frame, whereas right now it's really hard to tell where the focal point of the image should be. So I like to apply a custom vignette here rather than just a basic slider so that I can totally customize it for every scene. So I'm going to create a new folder here. I'm going to call this Vin for vignette, and I'm going to create 2 layers inside of this folder. Now on the first layer, I'm going to click and drag on the elliptical marquee tool, otherwise known as a circle selector. I'm going to zoom out here, clicking Command minus or Control minus on a PC. Now I can drag out. The problem is this is a very hard way to center the circle if I drag out from the center. But if I hold Alt Option, it will allow me to draw the circle from the center of the image. So somewhere about right there looks good to me. And now what I'm going to do is go over to Select, and I'm going to go to Modify. I'm going to go to Feather. We're going to feather by 1000 pixels. Now I can go up to Edit. I can go down to Fill, and I can go over to White. I'm going to click OK. Now I'm going to go to the other layer, and I'm going to go to Select, Inverse. I'm going to go down to Edit. I'm going to go over to Fill, and I'm going to go to Black. I'm going to hit OK. So now you can see I've got the vignette going, but it looks terrible. I'm going to hit Command D to get rid of that selection, or Control D on a PC. And now what I'm going to do is hide that top layer. I'm going to go to this bottom layer. I'm going to go down to Overlay, and I'm going to reduce the opacity to about 30% or so. And I apologize for this walkthrough being so fast, but I just want to make sure that I can get through the video as quick as I can, so those of you that are just watching it, you can see it quickly. And then if you are doing it alongside one of your images, which I highly recommend, you'll have the ability to pause and play the video to follow along with the steps that I'm doing. So now that I have this vignette layer, you can see it's way too dark on the edges. But what I'm going to do is hit Command T on a Mac, that's Control T on a PC. Then I'm going to Control click on a Mac or right click on a PC and go to Warp. Now, the cool thing is that I can actually warp this vignette into place exactly how I want. And I'm also going to change this blend mode over here to Overlay, which I forgot to mention. And that's looking good. So now we want to drag this out, obviously, because it looks terrible over there. Now, one reason that I really like this is that in a lot of images, I'll have light coming in from one side of the frame. So let's say the sun was over here rather than right here. I would want to keep this spot of the image really bright. So I drag this vignette way out over here so it doesn't affect that particular part of the image. It's not a problem in this image, but I like to stay consistent, so I always use this custom vignette. Let's pull this out a little bit more. Just darken this up on the edge. Bring this back in a little bit. And I think this is looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and hit enter and let that load out. It'll load out, and then you'll be able to toggle the whole vignette by just clicking this eyeball up here, which is a really nice way to see exactly what you've done. Okay, so now I can toggle this here. And what I really like about this vignette is that it's actually allowed me to kind of bring my viewer's eye into the center of the frame here and away from the edges where it was a little bit brighter. So that is looking really good. Now, the last couple of things that I want to do to this photo is a sharpen, and then I want to create one more layer where we can kind of tweak a few last minute settings. So I like using the Smart Sharpen, so I'm going to show you guys how to use that. In order to do that, I'm going to go Command, Alt, Option, Shift, and E to merge all visible. And then I'm going to go up to Filter, down to Sharpen, and I'm going to go to Smart Sharpen. Now, once Smart Sharpen loads out, you can adjust the settings and toggle preview, but it is very slow to preview. So I like to stick with these settings here, 340, 0.5, and usually 15 to 30%. I might lower it on this photo because I shot it at ISO 100. This just reduces noise. So I'll go down to about 20%. I'm just going to hit OK, and 340% oftentimes is quite strong, but what you can do is actually lower the opacity of this layer here, which is our Smart Sharpen layer. I'm just going to call that SS. So now I can zoom in and see what this Smart Sharpen has done. And you can see that the effect is minimal on the foreground. I can really see it on the edge here. I'll toggle that one more time. but where you're really going to see it is on the peaks of these mountains. Let's make sure we don't zoom in too much. There we go. So you can see that we've really kind of just made the peaks a little bit sharper there. And we've added some detail in here to the midground of the image. So I'm liking what it's doing. It's a very subtle effect, but that is good. I am shooting this on a Sony a7R IV with a nice lens, so the photo is already pretty sharp to begin with, but perhaps you guys aren't using a camera with as many megapixels or lenses with quite the sharpness. So this tool will probably affect your images a little bit more than mine, so it's a good tool to know how to use. So last thing that I want to do here is do another merge visible, Command, Alt Option, Shift and E. And then we're going to go up to filter. I'm going to go down to camera raw filter. This is kind of my final step on most of my images because this allows me to just, you can do a lot with a camera raw filter. It's just like editing in Lightroom, but you're doing it in Photoshop. So the nice thing is that I can apply lots of last minute tweaks here. So for example, I could open the color mixer and reduce the luminance of the oranges to kind of bring that sky back a little bit. I could increase the saturation of the oranges. I can increase the saturation of the yellows. And these are all tools that I could use elsewhere in Photoshop, but it's nice to have everything on one final last layer. Maybe I'll add a little bit of texture here, a little bit of clarity, not too much though. Maybe I'll adjust the temperature, not too much. Maybe I'll go back to my color mixer and I will reduce the saturation of purples. I don't really like what it's doing in the sky with the purple and the magenta. That's looking good. And let's go to the curve here. So a lot of times on the curve, my last step is I'll pop the highlights just to give the image a touch more punch. And this is different than popping the highlights in the basic tab. This is going to be a little more selective and pop just those really, really bright highlights. And let's see what that does. Yeah, I'm liking that. Okay. So I think that's looking good. We can go ahead and hit OK. And that pretty much wraps up my workflow in Photoshop, kind of exactly how I edit images here. I'll toggle this one more time. And let's just do a quick before and after. So this is after, and this is before. So you can see super simple and easy way to edit this image quite quickly. I highly recommend you watch this alongside editing one of your own images. All right, guys, I really hope that was helpful for you in order to figure out exactly how I do my workflow in Photoshop. Hopefully you picked some things up in this video that you can use in your own workflow. And yeah, I just want to thank you guys so much for checking out this video. As always, please make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you guys next Monday. Thank you so much.